as an introduction to the Sefer itself. One of the questions that the Gemara in Shabbos says that will be asked of every person after 120 years when they go to the Beis Din Shamala, to the heavenly court, is Tzipita liyeshua. Did you look for the salvation? Two of the other ones are, did you conduct your business honestly? And so on. Rabbeinu Nisim from Geroni, in his Chidushim on the Gemara, Chidushei Aran, adds one word to this, biyamecha, in your days. Did you look for salvation in your days? What is it that the Ran is trying to add, is trying to tell us? I mean, obviously you're looking in your days. It's not in another time period that you're looking for something. But it seems that the Ran is saying that every person has to look for salvation through an examination and a contemplation of what is happening in his own time. When I see what is happening in my time, I look at it and I analyze it as to whether it is telling me something about the ultimate salvation of the Jewish people. These things, Rav Drukman writes, were said about all generations, and all the more so in our own generation, where God's salvation is clear from everything that has happened in our generation. We have returned to the land. The state of Israel has been established. The exiles, a large number of them, have returned to the land. It's interesting to note that Israel is now the largest Jewish community in the world. The land has returned to us, including Jerusalem. How is it not possible to recognize that this is the hand of God, the Rock of Israel, and its Redeemer? When you look at the state of Israel today, it's been in existence for more than 60 years. The vast majority of the people that live in the state were born in the state or made aliyah at a young age. And to them, it seems as if the state of Israel has always been in existence. And in fact, for most people in the world, whether they live in Israel or not, the state of Israel essentially has always been in existence, something that's always been here. And out of this feeling of the inevitability of the reality of the obvious existence, that you don't see something special about it, it becomes people feel like they always have to criticize. They have to find out what's lacking, what's wrong, what's negative. And it is possible to find negative, lacking things in Israel today. But that it creates a failure to recognize the true greatness of the good, of the merit that we have had in the establishment of the State of Israel. Therefore, we have to remember the 2,000 years of exile, horrible exile, during which God's face was hidden from us, that the expression of this exile was pain, suffering, decrees, exiles, persecutions, slaughter, pogroms, until it concluded with the Holocaust that is just before our time. For most of us today, it's something that happened in the memory of our parents, not in our own memory. On the 5th of Iyar, 5708, 1948, God turned his face to us, and he revealed again, anew, God's desire for his people. He revealed again to the whole world the eternal love of the Creator of the world for the congregation of Israel, as is said in the second bracha for Shema in the morning, for Sfardim and Nusach Sfard, the Hasidim, Ahavat Olam Ahavtanu Hashem Elokeinu. The Lord our God, you have loved us with an eternal love. This is the real meaning of the State of Israel and the Day of Independence. Therefore, we are commanded to thank the Holy One, blessed be He, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with all of our hearts and souls, and to sing to Him a song about our redemption. If you think about Hallel, and it's really a historical song about redemption from Egypt, but it is the paradigm for all other redemptions. From the time of the establishment of the state, we are living we've had points of great celebration, and also we've had depressing points. We've had tripped over things, had problems. And sometimes that causes people to ask the question, where is this taking us? Are we truly in the process of redemption? Doesn't the redemption have to appear instantly, suddenly? Isn't Mashiach supposed to come riding on a white donkey and take us on the wings of eagles to our land? How is it possible that we are in the process of redemption when it looks as if the Jewish people is not fit for this? In response to these questions, and additional questions, this book was born. It grew up. One has to clarify the method of redemption that brings us, that the Master of the world brought us to this in the last generations. From the sources in the Torah, we have to deal with them, to look at them in depth, to examine the words of our rabbis, the great leaders of Israel in all the generations. These things can be clarified only through looking at the Torah, not through our own speculation. And the Torah was given by the one who spoke and the world was. Just like he spoke and created the world, so too it is his desire that creates the process of redemption that we're going through. This book is divided into two parts. The first part is clarifying in the general matter, in a general way, the process of redemption, the last redemption, not the redemption from Egypt or the redemption from the Babylonian exile. And the second part comes to explain specific things in our relationship to the State of Israel. The clarification of the process, the road to redemption, from its source in the Torah, is built upon a proper understanding of our relationship to the State of Israel. To understand its value, its true value of the State of Israel, its intent, its purpose for how we have to conduct ourselves to it, how we have to deal with the weaknesses that exist in the state, what should be the appropriate relationship that we have to the state, and what goes on with it comes together along with how we prepare our hearts, and how we understand and relate to redemption. We are living through a great era. We have to look at the reality around us, the great lights and the shadows, and the great shadows that are in it, with true eyes that know how to examine what is necessary. But more than this, that know how to value, to hold precious the good things that we have merited in the establishment of the state. It should be his will that just like we merited to the beginning of the redemption, so too we should merit to the complete redemption. That's Rav Drukman's introduction, so to speak, to this book. First chapter, Haga'ula Kima Kima. The redemption comes little by little. Kima Kima is Aramaic for a little bit. Talich Haga'ula, the process of redemption. As an introduction to the entire matter of the redemption of Israel, I will bring a story that appears in the Jerusalem Talmud, Brachot, chapter 1, Halacha 1, about two scholars that were walking in the road before dawn, and they saw Ayela Tashachar Shabaka Oro, the first rays of sunlight that broke in the morning, that broke through their light. This is the first source on the sheet that I sent you. Rabbi Chia Rabba Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta vu mahalchim bahada bikta arbel b'karitzta. The great Rabbi Chia, referring to Rabbi Chia, the student of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the author of the Tosefta, and Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta were walking in the valley of Arbel before dawn. V'ra'u yela teshachar shabaka oro, and they saw the first rays of sunlight striking the sky. The first rays of sunlight strike the sky before they strike the earth, because of the curve of the earth blocks the sun from striking us first. Amar Rabbi Chia Rabba Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta. Rabbi Chia Rabba the Great said to Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta, Rabbi, kachi geulatan shel Yisrael. Thus is or will be the redemption of Israel. B'techila kima kima. At first it is little by little. Kol ma shehi holechet, hi rabba v'holechet. As much as it goes, it becomes greater. Kach b'techila. Thus it was in the beginning. And now he quotes from Megillat Esther 5 different pesukim. Mordechai Yoshev b'shar hamelech. This is in chapter 2, verse 21. And Mordechai sat in the gates of the king. That's the status quo, so to speak. Ve'acher kach, in Perek Vav, Pasuk Yud Aleph. V'yikach Haman es levush v'esasus. And Haman took the garments and the horse of the king to dress Mordechai with. And you're saying that he's being promoted. And after that, in verse same chapter, verse 12, V'yashov Mordechai el shar hamelech, and Mordechai returned to the gate of the king. Seemingly nothing has changed, right? He started sitting in the gate of the king, and he's now returned and sitting in the gate of the king, the king's gate. V'acher kach, and it's only after that, Mordechai yatsa milifnei melech b'levush malchut. Mordechai went out from before the king dressed in royal garments. That's chapter 8, verse 15. V'acher kach, and after that, laYehudim haisa or v'simcha. The Jews had happy light and rejoicing. So, Rabbi Chia Hagadol, Rabbi Chia the Great taught us that the redemption of Israel is similar to the appearance of the light of dawn in the world. There are several things that are important about the appearance of light that relate to redemption. One, the dawn is a slow process. It's not like walking into a room and flipping on a light, right? It doesn't happen suddenly. Two, just like the process of dawn in this world begins when the first light comes, and before you see the first light, right? It's not detectable. It's a very small thing. Only later is it clear to us that the day began. It's not lightning or something in the distance. It was actually dawn. So too the process of redemption. In the very first stages, not all of us will be able to see that this is redemption, that is what is occurring. Only as it goes on and develops is it possible for more and more people to see that dawn has occurred. Some people, if you think about it, some people always wake up before dawn. They examine dawn. They're outside. They hear the first bird chirp, and so on. And some people sleep, and when they get up, it's already completely light. So they're not aware that something was happening already. 3, before the first light begins to come out, the greatest darkness is present. We say in English, it's darkest before dawn, right? That's the darkest part of night is immediately before dawn begins. Our rabbis stress this in a number of different places. Number 2 on our sheet is Midrash Socher Tov, that you do not have any more greater darkness than the hour before dawn. And your seed will be like the dust of the earth. When your children get to be the dust of the earth, at that minute, Ufratz Yama V'Kedma, you will break out to the west and to the east and so on. It's interesting the way the Midrash says this. This is the Midrash in Shemos Rabbah, the second source, third source on the page that I emailed to you. Because if you want to say Yegiu Ad, you come and tell it, or it could mean you become it. And if you think about the Holocaust as the last true form of night before the redemption, when it says Keshagiu Banecha Adafar Haaretz, when the Midrash Rabbah says that your children will become the dust of the earth or ash of the earth, and at that point things will change. It will be, and you will begin to break out and begin to expand and grow. In many ways, as we go through many of the midrashim, they will seem very, very much prophetic. And I think this is one of them that does. Next source from the Midrash Socher Tov. Yancha Hashem b'yom tzara. God will answer you in the day of your difficulty. A verse from Psalm 20, verse 2. Mashal la'avu ben. It's a parable of a father and son. Sheo mehalchim b'derech. They're walking in the road. V'nityagah ben. And the son gets tired. Amar la'aviv. He says to his father, Heichan hiya medina. Where is the city? Amar lo. The father says to the son, Bini, my son, Siman ze yeh biyadcha. This will be a sign in your hand. Im re'ita beita kavurot lefenecha. If you see the graveyard before you, harihi hamadina krova lecha. That will tell you that the city is close by. Graveyards were always outside of cities. In Los Angeles, you can't do it because the city has grown around where all the graveyards were. But originally, the graveyards in Los Angeles were built outside the city. Now it would be a ridiculous amount of driving to get to a graveyard outside the city. But that's the way, in most places where you go, that is true. Outside of cities, you have graveyards. Think of Yerushalayim. Of course, now Har Hazeisim is surrounded, but Har Menuchos is outside the city, and so too the graveyard in Beit Shemesh is outside the city, and various other places in Israel. The graveyards are always outside of the city. There's a halacha that they have to be 50 amos, about 100 feet, minimum outside of the city, and so on. Problems of Kohanim that don't want to become impure with the graveyards. So the Father says, when you see the graveyard, then you know you're getting close to the city. Kach amar lehem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael. Thus, the Holy One, blessed be He, said to Israel, Im re'isem hatzaros shetachfu etchem. When you see the difficulties that are overcoming you, ba'oto sha'a atem nigalim. At that point in time is when you will be redeemed. The Klei Yakar, one of the very interesting commentaries on Chumash, on the Pentateuch, explains this occurrence about this reality, that it is only before the first light appears that the greatest darkness exists. He says it's the natural way of the world, it's the natural way of redemption, and he explains this vis-a-vis Pharaoh's oppression and enslavement of the Jews. That's only after Moshe Rabbeinu was sent to Pharaoh. Only after the appearance of the signs of redemption, or the beginning of the redemption itself, that's when the enslavement got worse, right? As soon as Moshe Rabbeinu started speaking to Pharaoh, what happens? Pharaoh says, all right, you get no more straw. You have to gather the straw yourself. An interesting aside, by the way, is archaeologically we know that bricks in Eretz Yisrael were baked with only clay, without straw. And in Egypt, only in Egypt, in the ancient world, were they baked with straw. So the Klei Yakar writes on Shemot Perek Vav Pasuk Aleph 6:1. It is known that this is the nature of the world. Mehayidua shekachi yamida. Shebechol yom samuch lalot hashachar hachoshech machshich biyoter min chashchat halayla. In the morning, every day, close to the time of dawn, the dark grows darker more than any of the point of the darkness of the night. Ve'achar kach or hashachar bokeh va'olah. And after that, the light of dawn breaks out and goes up. V'ken, rov ha'cholim samuch lemitatam hem mitchazkim v'yoshvim alamita umevakshim le'achol ve'achar kach hamavet gover. So too, he says, this was before modern medicine, most sick people, close to their time of death, they get stronger, they sit up in bed, they ask to eat, and after that, death overpowers them. V'ken b'yamot ha'chorav. And so too it is in the winter. Samuch la'aliyat hashemesh, hakor holech v'gover, u'lebesov hu menutzach min hashemesh. In the winter, close to the time of the sun rising, the days getting longer, the cold gets greater, and in the end, the cold is overcome by the warmth of the sun, and spring comes. It's interesting. What is the winter solstice is at the end of December. but the coldest months of the year are January and February. You would think after the days start getting longer, there's more heating of the earth coming from the sun on those days, so you'd expect the coldest day to be around the winter solstice when there's the least amount of heat from the sun, but that's not true. It's after that point that you have the cold, the winter fights, so to speak, to keep its presence in the world, and it's only several months after that that the sun is able to defeat the cold and bring the warmth of spring and summer. I realize in Los Angeles, not so much of seasons, and there's not that much difference between it. There's not so much cold in the winter and so on, but in most of the world there is. And this is a natural thing. That every natural thing that feels that it is coming to its opposite, that attempts to negate its existence, it strengthens itself to fight against, to answer, to respond to the challenge that it's feeling against its nature. And in the end, the opposite force will be victorious. And so too it is with all of the things we have mentioned. As Pharaoh sees, for instance, which is what he's explaining, that Moshe Rabbeinu has come to redeem the Jews, he doesn't just give up and say, all right, go out. It's in the nature of Pharaoh to fight against the redemption and to make it more and more difficult until the redemption occurs. It is in the nature of darkness, of the night, to, so to speak, it's anthropomorphism, but to want to continue its existence. People want to live, and therefore, as they're sick and they feel death coming on, they fight to live. And they fight the most as they feel death coming closer to them. It's an interesting thing, by the way, that in terms of human nature, in terms of the surviving family, when someone does not die in a hospital and they die at home and they're capable of recovering a little bit and having some kind of farewell to their friends and their family, it's very emotionally healthy for the family. Many years ago, when Naftali Rubinstein, who from his bar mitzvah almost never missed a minyan, till he was sick as an old man, when he died at 2 o'clock in the morning at home. He woke up, all his children were around him, his grandchildren were around him. He said Kriya Shema with them, and then he passed away. And I think that's exactly what the Kli Yakar is talking about here. The body fights to have some semblance of life to it. And I think when it does that and a person passes away in that way, it gives a certain comfort to the family that's left behind. So Drukman explains, when any power, force comes and it perceives that it's the end, it strengthens its loins. It attempts to strengthen itself against its opposite force. Therefore, when the opposite force is at the door, that is when the previous force fights the most to keep it out. So too, before the light can shine, before redemption can come, the greatest darkness and the greatest suffering of the exile is immediately before it. The dark does not easily give up. The forces of exile do not easily give way to the forces of redemption. I think I did not send you the next piece, but if you have a computer screen, you will be able to see the next section on the screen, and I will email it after class, along with summaries. Next section is Matzmiach Keren Yeshua, which is, of course, a bracha in the Amida, in the daily prayers, that sprouts forth the horn of redemption. The bracha that relates in our prayers of the Shemona Esrei, of the daily Amida, recited 3 times, that relates to redemption, the messianic redemption, begins. Et semech David avdecha meherat tatzmiach, baruch et Hashem matzmiach keren Yeshua. The sprouting of David, your servant. It should quickly sprout. And then it concludes, blessed are you, God, who sprouts the horn of redemption, who causes the horn of redemption to sprout. In this bracha, we see the idea stressed 3 times of redemption, of sprouting. Using the lashon of the expression to sprout expresses the opening, the beginning of the process of the messianic redemption to that of the growing of a plant. We can find this expression, sprouting, used in many, many places in the prophets and in the writings. In Yirmiyahu, source 1, Hinei yamim ba'im neum Hashem, behold, days are coming, affirms God, Vakimoti leDavid tzemach, and I will establish for David a sprout, Tzaddik, he will be righteous, Umalach melech, and he will rule as a king, V'skil, and he will become wise, V'asa mishpat u'tzedakah ba'aretz, and he will do justice and charity in the land. The Radak, Rabbi David Kimchi, one of the most important of the commentaries on the Tevim and Kesuvim, writes on this, Semach Tzaddik will sprout forth a righteous person. Zehu Mashiach, this is the Mashiach. V'karahu Tzemach, and he is called Tzemach. Shi'et Tzeito ba'olam k'tzeit Tzemach hasadeh. He goes out into the world just like a plant grows in the field. Another case in Yirmiyahu, this is source 3, I believe. B'yamim hahem ve'etahi, it will be in those days and at this time, atzmiach leDavid tzemach, I will cause to sprout for David a sprout, tzedakah, righteous, dosei mishpat u'tzedakah ba'aretz, and he will do justice and righteousness in the land. And again, the Radak explains, Semech Tzedakah Zeh Melech Mashiach. What does it mean that righteousness will sprout? This is the Messianic King. So too it is in the prophecy of Zechariah, Ki hineni mevi et avdi tzemach, behold, I will bring to you my servant Tzemach. And the Radak says here again, Zehu Melech HaMashiach. This is the Messianic King. In the 6th parak of Zechariah, Pasuk Yud Beis, verse 12, Ve'amarte elav lemor, and you will say to him, saying, Ko amar Hashem tzvakos, thus says the Lord of hosts, lemor, saying, Hinei ish tzemach shemo, behold, there is a man, Tzemach is his name, sprout, umetachtav yitzmach, and under him, or under his rule probably, will sprout, uvana et heichal Hashem, and will be built the palace of God, meaning the temple. V'ken b'Teilim, and also in Psalms. Sham atzmiach keren leDavid, there I will sprout a horn for David. Arachti ner leMeshicha, I will set up a light for my anointed one. these verses are clearly the reason why the men of the Great Assembly 2,500 years ago, when they were forming the bracha for Messianic redemption in our prayer, used the word hitzmicha, growth, sprouting. And smicha, in many ways, is similar to Ayelet HaShachar, the first ray of the sun of at dawn. There are similarities to the words of Rabbi Chia HaGadol that we saw in the Gemara we started out with from the Yerushalmi and Brachot, to smicha, to the sprouting of a plant. The first similarity is that sprouting is a slow process, right? It takes a long time between the time you put a seed in the ground and you have a plant. Also, number two, when a person puts the seed in the ground, he looks at the ground after he's put the seed in, he's covered it, and he's watered it. He doesn't see anything, right? You can come back every day and nothing changes. It's always dirt. All you see is dirt. It's only after the sprout has begun to grow, has begun to develop, has begun to come up, right? It's been growing for a long time before you see the first green over the dirt that begins to come up. And it's only at that point that you know that it began to sprout a long time ago. In fact, if you think about it, there are many times when you plant a seed and it doesn't sprout, it doesn't grow, right? It rots in the ground for whatever reason. The seed doesn't germinate. Nothing happens. So you don't know when you put the seed in the ground whether it in fact will grow into a plant or not. There's another thing, third point, that a plant only grows when the seed that you put in the ground is gone. In Hebrew, you talk about it rotting. It's not really rotting. The energy forces in the seed are being used up to allow the plant to sprout. But in any case, if you would dig up the plant just after it sprouted, the seed is tiny and small and used up, right? So if you would set it up so you could just look at the seed during the process of the sprouting, it would look as if the seed were dying, not growing. Similarly, the Messianic redemption will have the characteristics, our rabbis tell us, of the sprouting of a plant. The men of the Great Assembly, the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, taught us that these three principles have to be used to examine the process of redemption. And I'll go over them quickly again. One is that it is a slow process. When a person looks at it at first, he cannot perceive it. It's only later on that it's possible to perceive that the process of redemption has already started. And three, the new sprouting comes up only once the previous source has rotted out and has died. Someone was once talking about why there is no great rabbinic leadership today in the United States and so on and so forth. And I responded with this piece from Tzmicha, from when Messianic redemption begins, the exile, which has been the home of the Jewish people for so long, will inevitably be rotting and falling apart. It's also expressed at great length that we'll see later on in the Sefer, in something that the Vilna Gaon wrote several hundred years ago in a Sefer called Kol HaTor, where he describes that, comparing to learning from 38th Perek, I believe, in Yecheskel, that the exile is compared to a graveyard, and he describes the Jewish people in the graveyard, and in a grave, the body slowly rotting. And the Cohen says it's only when the body is completely rotted that resurrection can occur, and the nation can at that point return to Eretz Yisrael. So it has to be, he's saying, that if redemption is occurring in Israel, then that is the final stages of the rot of the body in the grave, Chutz La'aretz. All right, we will leave it here for tonight and pick it up from this point on next week.